And share screen. And this is, you say it's not this slide? Is it the next
Can
one?
you go to the one before that? Yeah, where, okay,
You finished
the
this
one,
one.
the next one, this is the one we want. This, that, it is the right one. Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Okay, so we need to talk to local people. We need to clearly assess the positive and negative consequences of local cultural attitudes towards reintroduced species, because as I've said before, not everyone will view these animals in the same favourable light that we do. And so we need to recognise the cultural foundations for their thoughts and views about these animals, and also understand the basis for resistance to species restoration. That's really important. Okay. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So all this should result in building trusted, full relationships between interest groups. Trust is really, really important in conservation activity, and it's hard to build, it's easy to lose, and it's almost impossible to rebuild. So in order to try and build that trust and maintain that trust, we need to ensure the involvement of Indigenous and local knowledge holders in all stages of the project, from inception to reporting. And this hopefully will promote trust and equitability, considering how their knowledge features in the project as well as our own, and make sure that diverse knowledge systems are considered fairly and equally, i.e. don't prioritise our knowledge over local people's. I think it's really important to foster self-reflection about ourselves as conservationists and social actors, to think about how we are perceived by our communities and our activities. Ensure we listen and learn from underrepresented and marginalised groups who may well not resist the project in an overt manner, but will sort of show their resistance in under the radar, if you like, maybe making up stories about the project that aren't true, rumours, gossip, that sort of thing. We have to understand that our identity impacts and possibly prejudice our interpretation of the world. I mean, that's our positionality, and conservationists need to reflect on that a lot more than they do. Along with that, helpful in that is to combine qualitative with quantitative data collection. I, for example, use ethnographic data collection analysis, and that has provided me with a richer, more nuanced understanding of the full picture at my research site. Don't be scared of qualitative data. It has immense value in conservation. And that will help you understand the local cultural context and the particularities of the relationship between people and the focal species. And don't forget that one size doesn't fit all. So, you know, attempting to transpose methodologies or things that have worked in one place won't necessarily work in another one. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, the costs and benefits for local communities and projects. I mean, you need to develop measures of well-being together with the local community, because that will allow for meaningful and relevant assessment of the costs and benefits of the project. It's important to tease out solutions that are both politically and culturally acceptable, and to optimize gains that are most beneficial to local people. Assess both positive and negative economic impacts. Hopefully, you know, that will help you then move forward, because obviously things like, I mean, wild boar that often reintroduce themselves as they have done in the UK, obviously there are some benefits to having them for forest biodiversity and health, but also, as you can see here, I think this is in Rome, they do tend to be not really recognise the boundaries between urban and rural. Next slide, please. Yeah, understanding and considering political and jurisdictional issues. This can end up, if you're not quite careful with this, if your project is bottom up, i.e. is being pursued by the people living in the proposed reintroduction site, like, for example, a Native American tribe, then you must be quite careful that you've got all representatives of all groups who may be affected by the planned translocation. I mean, for example, a case study, we have here the a brochure about proposed reintroduction of the swift fox in southern Alberta on blood tribe land, and the proposed site raised the possibility of a potential conflict with existing and projected oil and gas development. So continued funding for the project was not continued after 1 year. So this was an unsuccessful attempt from a community to reintroduce a species that was biologically and culturally salient to them, because of the political and economic kind of problems there would have been by trying to, for oil and gas, for example, wouldn't have been able to drill if there'd been a den site of a swift fox, which is an endangered species in Canada. Assume additional financial resources will be needed for some species. See the foreseeable needs of some species with large home ranges, for example, and species such as primates and carnivores. Probably additional financial, NGO and professional support will need to be factored in to work on a larger scale and with more complex results from the reintroductions. Okay, thank you.
So when we go into the second stage, once the management plan has been established, it should be carried out with consistency and transparency to inspire trust and confidence amongst the different interest groups, but also with flexibility enough to address any emerging disagreements or doubts. In this stage of the process, building trusted relationships through inclusion, it's one of the most important things, and will happen in different ways. So to start with, working together with local and indigenous communities, and that includes identifying the interest groups and their values and expectations in relation to the project. So to do that, you need to start listening and also giving people a voice. So listening and learning before introducing information about the project. In that way, you find out what people already know before introducing the project to them. Then, once you know what they know, you can identify the gaps in knowledge and the areas that must be targeted for change, and that can be done through communication and education. Now, to listen to people and to interpret and to gain this knowledge, one of the things that we need is cross-disciplinary research collaboration. And that includes having social scientists working with conservation scientists or behavior researchers who are actually trained to listen and document people's views. This way you can assure that the concerns and viewpoints of different people in different interest groups are respected and incorporated into decision making. But also we need to make clear that the research may not dictate policy. As part of building these relationships, building strong relationships to mitigate any potential conflicts, of course, is very important. For that, we must focus on coexistence and on bringing people together to find solutions rather than focusing on the negatives, on conflict. Focusing on the common ground, on what people have in common, and listening to solutions proposed by various interest groups. So valuing local solutions as they can be better for the context, better informed than solutions devised from the outside and then brought in. Trying to understand, so in terms of negatives, it is important that we try to understand the motivations and behind negative attitudes or illegal activities, also towards finding solutions. And this way, not relying on knowledge that was gathered from previous experiences in different places, in different projects, but collecting context-specific data. This case study here is about the Hawaiian monk seal, and the research found that what was under the conflict was about a distrust of the state, a distrust of the restrictions on resource use related to the project, issues of moving, translocating seals, and also the socially constructed narratives from the different groups involved. And that provoked conflict between local groups and the reintroduction project, and that could have been addressed in different ways. So working with putting together education and awareness plans to build support can start by building these relationships with local leaders so that you know who is trusted with, who should be involved in this communication of information and education campaigns. So developing an understanding of how attitudes towards individual animals and the species may support project goals is seriously important. Where am I? Investigating associations between attitudes towards the focus species and people's affiliations, if people who are linked to bird watching or hunting or farming groups have different attitudes, and also depending where they live in relation to the release site. The education campaigns are very important for conservation of culturally important species, and this can be used in different ways to bring support towards the reintroduction project. So these campaigns may focus on individual animals. In a way, it's easier to care for individual animals, to make a relationship with them, but that brings to surface problems of welfare, because at the end of the day, too much attention on the individuals is not healthy for a conservation project that focus on what's happening to the species as a whole or to the populations of the species. So these campaigns can also focus on populations and species, and when the species are charismatic, it just makes the program easier. That's where the accredited zoos and aquariums can play an enormous positive role in supporting conservation plans in several ways. They can help by promoting a link between people, local people, and the species in focus, by just people getting to know the species if it is present in the zoo. So making this affective connection is very important for developing care. There is also the zoos will have or may have trusted good quality information about the species and how to relate to them and be safe. And they also can raise money for the conservation through campaigns and fundraising campaigns. They can help in several ways. Now, in terms of changing behaviors, it's always best to, once the behavior is established, it's always more difficult to change it. So if you develop a cooperation between bioscientists, social behavior scientists, and management to promote positive behaviors that favor the reintroduced species, and that can be local practices and beliefs that are already there, that would be much better. And then also to target behaviors that could increase negative interactions in the future. Maintaining clarity and transparency about costs and benefits of the projects remains just as important as in the first phase. So having this having information based on quality assessments of ecological, social, and personal costs and benefits available earlier on and in the planning phase, and then maintained throughout the pays off. sorry, I'll pass you on to my colleague, Jake Owens.
Thank you. Yeah, so the threat of domestic dogs was one of the case studies that we explored in this process. Domestic dogs do pose a really high risk to the success of translocation programs for a wide variety of species. And I dealt with this specifically with the release of giant pandas in China, which you might not expect, but I'd say underreported problem in reintroductions and translocations. And so the success of the actions to mitigate the impact posed by dogs are often linked to the perceptions, customs, and livelihoods of the local communities. In our project, in the initiation stage, that this was a serious problem, and it was a little for us to be finding out. But once we did, we took the steps, including working with the other, incorporate the human interests into the control measures so that they could have better chance of success. Listening sessions, informal conversations, and formal surveys to try to figure out how the dogs were currently managed at that time, what level of care and control the owners gave to them, and then also what role the dogs had in the community. The dogs were primarily kept for security purposes. We also tried to figure out a better understanding of themselves were relating to wildlife and the project, and therefore, how they thought about their dogs and their interactions. And so through camera trap surveys and color-coded collars, we were able to show the villagers actually going really far out into the nature reserves, into the forests. And because of trust that we had built, they believed us that when we told them the dogs were actually out there hunting. And so that knowledge sharing was really essential to developing solutions, because the solutions came from them, or subsidized programs that actually benefited them, like spay and neuter. They don't want like tons of dogs randomly running around their villages, and vaccinations for health concerns, and then alternative methods for the services or ranger patrols to provide more security. Next slide, please. So at this point, I think we've impressed that you should have a good understanding of how human interactions might impact your project, and also some strategies to mitigate them. But for the long-term project success, you should commit to these launches about how human dimensions of the project, including the perceptions of the project itself on the community members, are going to have an impact. I think almost all of us in translocation today have a plan for long-term population monitoring of our focal species. But how many of us is for human perceptions and interactions related to the releases? Probably not that many, hopefully a growing number. And so this has to be designed in the planning stage and carried out through the implementation. So for an example here, there's a qualitative study of villager reserve in India after tigers had been released, and feel that basically there was a period of 1 to 2 decades where tigers had been extirpated, and the locals had lost the knowledge and the behaviors that enabled them to avoid conflicts with the tigers since that extirpation, and so it caused there was also perception amongst those local people that those translocated tigers were foreigners, and they didn't think it was possible to cope with new tigers. So longitudinal studies that start at the beginning and then throughout the project will help assess those dynamics and then hopefully mitigate against them. Next slide, please. So to improve the chance of success, you should develop structural communication systems into your work as a specific and intentional part of your implementation. So it's just as we might have long-term plans for camera trap surveys, or how we're going to monitor GPS data, up so you have clear and consistent communication channels with all the groups that you engage. So this not only helps ensure that the longitudinal studies throughout the project are going to continue because those systems are set up, but also helps maintain trust. Also plan to continually seek out and recruit new individuals and interest groups that you might find. In our case with giant pandas, we found who ended up having all these connections to all these different villages, and she really thought that this was a serious problem, and brought us to these villages and convened these meetings. And so having a trusted member like that in the community to convene is a really big leg up in the process of finding solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so actively involving the local community is something that you should plan to do again through the end of the project for both their benefit and to increase the likelihood of the program's success. So for example, in another tiger reintroduction program in Panda Tiger Reserve in India, the local stakeholders, owners, village chiefs, tourism sector representatives, they're all engaged individually at first, and then they kind of came together in forwards to develop a vision for what this species recovery would look like. And that engagement was complemented with bi-weekly updates on the project, and that allowed the practitioners to have direct communication on a seek out local input to guide the project on an ongoing basis. And so over time, these efforts improve the local knowledge of it, which is obviously super important. And also it helps to build the trust between the groups, the local groups and the project staff. In that project as well, there's local religious leaders were involved to interpret the significance of restoring lions and then communicate that significance in ways that the local communities would accept. And so we really strongly advise that you allocate to support a dedicated group inside your project to be the interface with local community members from the start, again, throughout the entirety of your project. Next slide, please. So a lot of what we're discussing, we keep on saying trust and building trust between practitioners and local communities. And really important to that, avoid missteps, especially, is you need to know how your actions might be culturally perceived, and you can't make assumptions about that without communicating. So sometimes local people might have concerns about invasive collection methods for biological data, and that might go against their cultural beliefs, how you handle animals. So if you're attaching radio collar to certain animals, that might be considered disrespectful, and then there's a negative opinion about you, or this might cause some problems. So knowing that beforehand to avoid potential conflicts. It also shouldn't be negative all the time. Consider how your profit local people. So community development initiatives and infrastructure in association with those conservation translocation projects can help to foster the coexistence and also develop new conservation supporters among those community members. Our local people, by combining community involvement, the celebration of their culture, because it's their culture that you're working, and also revenue and skills generation when you can. And throughout the implementation, you should always try to continue to consult with all the local people that you've been consulting with to find new potential conflicts that are arising or opportunities to support them, so that you have the best chance of success. I think next, Carlos Ruiz Miranda is going to continue. Thank you.
Yes. So now is the end stages and exiting the project. So at this stage, the translocation has created a change in the community, hopefully a positive, but it's a time to evaluate, again, using the adaptive management, if how's everything working, whether a good conservation network has been created and established. So it's time for the next phases, next stages. So one thing is to plan for the long run at the end, because conservation is going to continue after the translocation. Translocation is one of the tools we have. So the animals, let's say the animals are in place, and the conservation network is going on. And then what now? Now comes another phase of conservation. And so we must also design the exit strategy for the stewards, the projects, but also for individual members or key players in a way that it will allow for continuity of the conservation actions. So build the strategies into the exit in connection with the goals of the project. We have to analyze the contributions funders can make, positive and any negative impacts, especially what would happen if a major donor leaves, if a major player leaves, what would be the possible negative consequences. And I will come back to this in a couple of slides. Also, it's interesting from the beginning of the project to discuss the minimum time duration, the kind of commitment, you know, you're going to be here until which phases, and it might be like a contract or a pledge. You know, I'm going to fund you at least until this phase. And then also to consider all stakeholders when planning the exit strategy, because the reintroduction and exits affect partners differently. Next slide, please. So, for example, the goal of an exit strategy is to leave with the minimal negative consequences to the translocation or to the conservation network that was put in place. And so you have different kinds of exit scenarios. You could have decide to end the translocation because you had success, you reach all the goals you wanted, and it's been very successful. So you have things to do even in that situation. There's data to be shared, there's benefits to be shared. So if you don't have an exit strategy, you can have legal problems, or resources can be lost, or stakeholders can be disenchanted with the project. What are you going to do with the staff that you trained and that has worked in the project? What's going to happen to these people now? There's also the failure, things didn't go well. So what are you going to do? You know, if you do it well, then it can be a learning opportunity. You can share the information about that, and you can leave the stakeholders at least satisfied in the sense that we tried, it didn't work, but we tried, and we did everything right. If you don't consider exiting and suddenly the project ends, again, you can have several of the same things here, legal and financial problems, you can lose information, and nobody's going to be happy with this. And then you have the handoff, which is very common. You'll have a project, and then you're going to pass it on to somebody else that's going to continue the conservation of the species. So a good exit strategy will have continuity of the stewardship, the capacity to continue the project will be there, perhaps new opportunities, local empowerment. And if you don't plan for this handoff, then you could lose your project completely, and then your data, there will be capacity diminished, financial and legal problems. And then this one, the last type of exit is the cessation. This is more like a big donor decides, you know, well, we change our interest and then we're going to, you know, get out of the project. So if there's no exit plan for this, you can have even a potential failure of a good project because a major funding source left or major contributor left. Okay, so you have to consider the timing of the project. You know, when are these exits going to happen? The responsibilities that need to be passed on or shared, and then the reasons to exit, which are these four kind of scenarios. Next. So you can also look at the exits in terms of where you are in the process of establishing like a population of animals in a location through translocation, and then you may have to think, you know, it should be upfront. You should say, well, this institution, are we going to go all the way up to the beginning of the growth curve? So you're going to be here in time. So what will be your main task for your exit strategy? So this is a handoff strategy to a new steward that will build capacity. You know, you will ease the transition. If you are doing a voluntary cessation, then you have to mitigate your damages to that conservation network. Such as don't leave people without salaries, don't leave people without means to continue the project, for example. And if it was a big success at this point, and then you need to share data learning, and you need to maintain this conservation network in place for some time for the project to continue. So you can look at it also into how close to your biological goals have you, or ecological goals have you come to, and when you're planning your exit strategy? Next. Next slide. Okay. Well, yeah. So there is the perception of the exit and the handoff strategy, for example. So one recommendation is that you need to secure your long-term sustainability because you can create new career opportunities. I mean, they have been created by the project, and this can be transferable. This is like the refitting of people. So now you've created a whole group of professionals in an area, or people that are working in something. So this can be passed on to other functions. There are infrastructures that were set up in place. And then you also have to work on the weaning people off the project infrastructure. That means getting them to be able to continue the project with the means they have locally, without having to depend on this external source, perhaps, of funding or of expertise. And then again, invest in the long-term strategies to prevent, that you went and did the project, you did the translocation, you change perhaps practices that created impact on the species, like poaching, and you develop positive attitudes. But if you don't do it right, then you might go back to all practices that were done before, or prevent the development of negative attitudes towards the project. One thing that we think about here, it's about the conservation network. It's that, when a project leaves suddenly and people are left, for example, unemployed or disenchanted with the project, we didn't like this, they might have a different opinion next time somebody else comes around wanting to establish a conservation project. So that's the impact on conservation network, which goes beyond your project. It extends to possible future projects. Next slide. And then when you're done a translocation, there may be some monitoring that you want to do after that, and continue some other conservation actions, perhaps habitat restoration or improving things. It's hardly ever a reintroduction or translocation ends, and then all you need to do for that species, it's done. You need to do other things. So community-based monitoring is really important. And so you are, I mean, if you recruit the local community and you do something like a citizen science, and this community might help you know whether your animals are there, no problems have developed, and what's going on, okay? And this is really important for the long-term success of the translocation. Especially if you can enable and enhance traditional practices that were there that will promote this biodiversity conservation and benefit also the focus species. So you want to make sure that that's enabled. Next slide. And then you have your post-exit. So this is basically a continuation. You exit and then you did your handoff strategy, and now you consider positive and negative consequences of the project beyond its immediate goals. So how is this going to continue? Is the species now, you gave it a start, an impulse, and conservation needs to continue, and whether this project also, you had an impact in conservation of biodiversity in general. So you created a conservation mentality in the region. You need to maintain the clear communication, and don't make unrealistic promises as to what's going to happen in the future. And really important is the capacity building for the long-term maintenance or pursuit of new goals related to the project. So you did the translocation. It was one of the tactics used and one of the tools used for the conservation of the species, and it's set, you release the animals, now you have a population in place, and then there may be new conservation goals. And it's important that you have a local team there with good capacity to continue that. Next. Okay.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So here we have all the 5 phases that we considered in our strategy of working out how to deal with human-wildlife interactions in conservation translocations. And now I'm going to open to questions and to general discussion to hear from your experience and how do you feel that these recommendations fit in or not with what you research or what you have in your practice. I think we've got until 4:30. So, you know, we might finish earlier as well, but let's see, we have time for a good discussion. Just a few things while I think Sean is having a look at comments and questions. If you would like to know more about the group, we've got a website, and we also on Facebook, and we have a ResearchGate presence. In the website, you find all of our resources from different discussions. We have reports and publications from members of the group. And these guidelines we discussed here, they are being revised for publication, hopefully, in spring next year, as part of a special issue for Frontiers in Conservation Sciences. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing. And Sean, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment, no. Faye asked earlier if there was any possibility to have these slides after the session, but I believe it's being recorded. So presumably it'll be available on ICCB, the conference website.
It would be great. We could share the slides. I'm not sure what's the best way to do it.
I mean, we could put them on, yeah, we could put them on YouTube or something. The recording could be put on YouTube because you
or the Facebook page.
It will certainly be in our website.
One of the things that who's on here now has any interesting case studies. That's something that we're really interested in, because we all kind of came together because we were all dealing with these issues ourselves, and so we're trying to gather case studies about this. In your experience, we'd love to hear about them.
It would be nice if you'd like to introduce yourselves and ask something or share an experience. We'd like to hear who you are and you know.
Okay, we have a question from Faye, and she says, do you set a threshold for level of acceptability? I don't know who'd like to answer that. Do you mean acceptability by communities, Faye, or interest groups?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't explain that very well. Yeah, I just wondered, I was doing a project at the moment and I was reading up, and it doesn't, none of the literature that I've read kind of has a threshold of support. So it goes, right, we've got 75%, so that's going to be acceptability. I think there was only one paper about a tiger reintroduction that set 75% and it didn't make it. But I just wondered if you have a recommendation of a level, or do you think it's context specific?
As you know, we made quite a thing about it being place-based and context-specific. I mean, I'm not even. I mean, Carlos, do you want to answer that? Do you want to come in?
No, that's like the social feasibility study that you need to do, and it's a great question, Faye. I mean, what would be what will you do if a community finds it completely unacceptable that project is going to go there? I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing. Will you impose a project? And I mean, that's important, and it certainly has happened, and it's the source of conflicts in some cases. So this is what we're saying. This, you have to go through a social feasibility phase and this pre-translocation phase of the project. Initial maybe is probably in those cases a lot more important because you really have to work it out and bring people together to buy into the plan. This is the whole idea of this human dimension of including the community from the beginning in the plans, and you're really working the feasibility. And it's an open question. What's a level of acceptable feasibility? How do you know? I mean, that's a really interesting and open question that we would like to hear from other people. Exactly how do you go about establishing that? And what will be the options? And we welcome more input on this.
I have a question, if I may to ask.
Hi, Mohammed. Nice to see you here. Please.
Yeah, nice to see you. Yeah, so thank you for the presentation by Carlos and Jacob. I joined when Jacob was giving the talk. So my question is, I have been engaged in quite a few translocation for conflict animals. So there were either different types of birds, black or brown birds, or leopards. And the way we had to do was to get rid of the leopard in the first place, because the leopard or the bear was causing lots of conflict. But eventually we had to find somewhere else. And finding somewhere else needs immediate action, because we were not able to work with people, because you have to get the leopard put somewhere in captivity for a few days and then just release somewhere else. So in that way, we are not really able to do anything with people. So I was wondering how to engage, I mean, how to consider people or human dimension in that sort of quick action, quick translocation projects.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, myself, I don't have experience with dangerous, let's put it, animals or potentially conflicted animals like, you know, bears or leopards. But I mean, what would be the people's fears? What would be that people fear most, and what could be the potential? I mean, there should be a way of kind of getting an idea of the possible conflicts that you will have and how to mitigate them. But sometimes you have to. When you say quick translocations, it's that you have an animal and you need to do something with it immediately. Yeah, those are very, I would say that's probably the most difficult situation in terms of engaging the community, because you need to do it now. And in that case, my recommendation would be as far away from people as possible, because you really don't have time to prepare, unless you are really preemptive about this and you foresee these translocations to happen occasionally, and then you start working certain communities as a destination, sort of, you know, kind of be preemptive about it. That would be the only way I would think about it. You find some areas where you think you'll have a community that will be receptive, do your research before, and then you set them up, and then when you have an emergency, then you know the places to go because you've worked with them before. That would be, to me, the only way to do it.
Yeah, that's also, Carlos. That's what with sections or translocations for problem bears. I know that they've done that large. Homeowners or landowners that have really large spaces that they've just developed in New Hampshire, that they've developed relationships with over the last 20 years. They just released the bears in those same locations, and obviously black bears are going pretty far, but they've also had fairly good the larger community. It's a big project, and so there's some people who hate it and some people who love it, and it's kind of a mixed bag, and therefore they get mixed results. But in terms of the actual releases, yeah, just having established sites where you can put them. I mean, here I'm in Los Angeles, and mountain lions, every once in a while we have to move mountain lions around, try to put them somewhere where there's very few people out in the middle of nowhere, and hope that it doesn't kind of monitoring afterwards. And sometimes it works, and sometimes those animals end up going into rescues or zoos or something afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the Flavia asked about hearing about more about the dog interaction. It's funny because when this came up in my project, it wasn't something that I had it wasn't something we considered. You know, nobody about dogs and giant pandas or anything like that, and a couple animals, and one was absolutely attacked by dogs and died from an infection in its shoulder and its dog from dogs. And because talking about it, nobody really believed that it was a problem. And it was this really interesting like cultural perception that their dogs, and it was either, you know, they would blame feral dogs, or they would say dogs, it's not possible for a dog to hurt a panda. So it took a lot of time. It took a lot of time and a lot of communication just to get them on board with the idea that a dog could actually hurt a panda or a lion, that they were a threat to wildlife. And then the next step was that they didn't believe that their dogs were going out into the wild, these kinds of things. And so then we had to do a lot of background research. We worked with people to do it. And fortunately, the people who work, who live on the outskirts of these giant panda reserves, they love pandas. Like, the people are on board with pandas, and also bring this local economy. But they just didn't believe that their dogs were. So for us, it was really a lot of background research to show them, you know, show them directly that the dogs were causing the problem. And then after they believed it, because, you know, it was a security risk, and then also you know, they also didn't think about the very rural people. They're largely subsistence, and so it was just a lot of background research to show them kind of effects, and then work with them directly to come up with solutions. And we're thinking of all these really, and what ended up happening was the forestry department, and the local people were like, oh, we don't actually care about our dogs, we just want pigs. And then where they traded dogs for pigs. So it was really kind of complex. And then we built that into our assessment protocols for nature reserve assessment. Then after that, the next site that we actually went to look at for reintroductions, we one of the factors was that there were no, and, you know, that was a learning thing. For us. Cool thing is that it wasn't even when we started working there, and then now there's been several papers, and there's been a lot of work since then to highlight this as an issue. Did you have some experience yourself with it? And if you can just unmute yourself and chat if you feel comfortable.
Flavia, would you like to come in and comment? Lost the question. Oh. I don't know what happened to Flavia. Maybe lost connection.
Sorry, it's there's a bit of noise in here, so sorry. Yes, thanks for sharing. It's just because it's a problem we had seen with snow leopards. It's kind of interesting issue, because the animals are, you will never think of a dog attacking, just like a panda, you never think of a dog attacking a cat like that. But because the dogs are quite big, the dogs that are used, and many of them got feral, so it's been a large issue. But the same, it's something that we never anticipated. So thanks for sharing this.
Where are you working? Where?
I'm working with the Snow Leopard Network, but this work has been seen the attacks has been seen with many researchers throughout like the range in many areas, Mongolia, China, and other areas as well, India.
Well, we've even heard about it with tigers, you know. So I ended up doing kind of deep diving into this after we found out that it was you, and you know, it was just out of my scope of, you know, the literature that I looked at in there to say cats or something, and so we ended up doing a lot of work on it, and you know, you find out that it's doing it's a problem with tigers, you know, then obviously it's a problem with pandas, you know, snow leopards are nothing compared to a tiger, say. Sorry, my little one is.
Exactly.
Oh.
With
She's
tigers is
stealing-
something very
stealing
impressive.
Your show. Sorry.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Antoinette, did you want to ask something? Or make a comment, or
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah, I
what
just wanted to
different stuff.
yeah, thank you for the really inspiring presentation, and I can't wait for the guidelines to be published. That's going to be super useful. My background is more working on human-elephant conflicts, so more with wild animals. But we're actually working on a research project to investigate the feasibility of rewilding Asian elephants. There is of course a huge risk of human-elephant conflict. So we are at the moment really focusing on potential areas and to see if there's local support for such a project. And then mostly like what benefits local people could get from such a project in terms of developing ecotourism, alternative livelihoods, and things like that. So I was wondering, from all the different projects you have been involved in, what did you see in possibilities in terms of developing ecotourism or anything around it that would stimulate local livelihoods? That would be very interesting to hear from you. Thank you.
Well, we're doing the ecotourism guidelines now for primates anyway, so a lot of these have similarities. I mean, of course, when you do a reintroduction translocation project, one of the potential benefits for the community, it's revenue from ecotourism and showing the animals. I mean, and that's something to be worked in. That is one of the things to be worked in from the beginning and really have the expectations well set up, so that as to, you know, who's going to benefit how much and what's the idea, you know, here, and kind of bring together conservation and revenue, so it doesn't become so you create other problems. I mean, you're with the elephants. I mean, there's lots of ecotourism of elephants, but ecotourism has its impacts. So there are ways to do this in a way that you're promoting conservation. It has to be ecotourism that does conservation. But I would say that yes, this is exactly one of the benefits you can use to bring a community in and participate and keep it at a long-term monitoring afterwards, and have it be a very community-based project. I would say ecotourism could be well done. It could work, but ecotourism has its potential downsides. It can, you know, get away from you and become a, you know, cheap enterprise that's not conducive to conservation.
Yeah, I mean, to add what Carlos is saying, I think, you know, we are currently writing guidelines for, well, it's not so much primate ecotourism, because there are very few projects that are actually ecotourist, but primate tourism in general. And sometimes you create a monster so that, you know, you get more problems than solutions, really. I think the most important thing with any of these projects, development or tourism or any of those things, is to manage people's expectations, because I think people get very, very excited about these things, and then obviously it doesn't take off immediately, or things go wrong, or we have a pandemic and everything goes horribly wrong. So yeah, I think relying on tourism, for us, I think in the primatology world, it's not a panacea. You have to have other benefits for local communities, as well as a financial benefit from tourism. Thanks.
I'd say too, I'd say too, you should think about, well, where are you working? Where's range country is the project in, Antoinette?
This is in Thailand.
You should just check out some of this. There's probably a pretty strong similarity between the panda reintroduction work that we're doing and what you're doing there in terms of ecotourism. And the expectations thing is huge, because basically every small local reserve wanted us to come in, and they're trying to like court us to come in to release pandas into their area so that they could generate ecotourism. And like one of our selection process as we went through it was, who's actually in this for the long haul, and to throw some pandas in there so that they can get tourists in. That was, the majority of places were that. And then once you go through and say it's going to take us 5 years to build the facilities, and to get to the point, whatever it is, their interest kind of wanes a little bit, and there's a lot of political pressure. So yeah, it's super challenging. But then as Colors said, there's a lot of jobs that came from the project, like new job creation, rangers, but also custodians. They built a small museum so that it wasn't relying, because nobody's going to see the released pandas at all, ever, but they'll see this museum that has, some old taxidermy animals and some information. It's a good conservation interpretation inside there. So that was, I think that I was fairly happy with how that turned out, because it had this whole other side that didn't want the release of pandas.
Yeah, that's super useful. Thank you. And I will look up the Panda project. And yeah, I totally agree with not relying on ecotourism. That's actually the main driver to provide an alternative for all these elephants that are working in tourism at the moment, to at least live in the wilderness and don't depend for their food sources on tourists. So yeah, it definitely needs to be a diversity of livelihood options. But yeah, it's really great information, and I will definitely dive into your resources. So thank you.
There is another way that people have been doing is marketing products as species friendly if they are produced in a way that protects the environment and increases the habitat and stuff. And I don't know if that could be something that
that's actually what we're doing now with wild elephant conservation. So we're trying to convince farmers to change to crops that elephants don't like to eat, and then we sell them as elephant friendly products, and create like boutique products from them, and trying to find a market that has more value than the crops that they used to grow. So yeah, these type of projects are there already, but there's definitely a lot more potential. And yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. Well, we are about to finish. So if there is any, if there are any last minute questions or comments quickly. Flavia was asking about conservation tourism, if it is a concept that any of us use. Don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. Just before we close.
Specifically, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can set up tourism related to these projects, and a lot of different styles, from your what you call experience tourism, where people go and become researchers and help the researchers to just visits to see from a distance. I mean, you have to really set it up in a way that's more conducive to your conservation project. I mean, at least that's my perspective. So there are a lot of ways of setting it up, and it's a case by case basis. The bottom line is, again, the managing the expectations of the people that are going to be benefiting from it.
Okay. So I'm just going to share our website address once again. And I just put it in chat, okay? And just say thank you very much for the people who stayed with us through adversity and to the end. And please be around, get in touch. Some of you are already in our network. But if you're not, would love to make this a long-term thing. Okay, and thank you very much. Thank you to all of our team as well who are here, and to the conference and to the hosts. Okay, I'll see you guys around.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.